Gali Morathi. Adventure level 13. Dwarf. Calcuttin. I don't fucking get it, Rebus said while rubbing his temples. Isn't this a dead dungeon? Apparently not, Hina replied. Travelers have gone missing nearby, and the only thing the disappearances have in common is tracks that lead back to this dungeon. We stared at the mausoleum that marked the entrance of the Telokam dungeon for a moment. Rebus wasn't wrong. Until a few days ago it had been classified as neutralized and looted. Then some newbie adventurer went looking for his missing cousin and found some blood and a ripped pack, then followed some tracks back here. It's probably for the best that he immediately turned tail and reported it to the Venerator's Bureau. Our party is contracted to the Venerator's Bureau and is currently comprised of 5 members. Mako, an orc from the Unified Chiefdoms, who's large enough to make a Nahalim pause. Ithrima, an elven sorceress that's been with the party for about half a decade now. Then there's Rebus, Hino, and myself. All 3 of us are dwarves from the western fringe of Calcutta, and founding members of our locally famous group, the Western Wasters. I absolutely hate our name. It's supposed to indicate the fact that we originate from the western point of Calcutta, and that we are willing to go into the wastes. To me, the name makes it sound like we're a bunch of drunks. Unfortunately, the one who coined the name died slowly and painfully because of consumption. It was sad enough to make us stick with the dumbest fucking name of all time. What do you think, Gali? Mako asked. This gotta be an easy one? Bah, I replied. How should I fucking know? Don't got anything to base that kind of judgment off of. Last reported monster in this fucker was kobolds, but kobolds don't do kidnappings. Hell, they don't even like going above ground. Mako shifted, his heavy armor clinking as he hefted his pike casually onto his shoulder. The rest of the party also fidgeted nervously. Nobody liked it when I couldn't tell how dangerous something was going to be. It's probably just luck, but I've never been wrong. Might also have something to do with the fact I don't venture a guess unless I've got something to go off of. Well, I guess it's not like I've got nothing. A dungeon supposedly filled with lower-tier monsters suddenly becomes a hideout for kidnappers. The entrance to said dungeon is a fucking grave marker, and I can smell death from all the way out here. There's no chance this is going to be a safe quest. Fuck it, I sighed. I'm gonna say it's probably life-threatening, so let's just do what the Bureau asked and take a peek, yeah? Sounds good to me, Rebus said, attaching his shield to his arm. Is all they're fucking paying us for anyway? Come now, Rebus, Ifrima scolded. We don't do this for the pay. We do this to make things safer for the citizenry of the Empire of Calcutta. Ifrima was the most patriotic of our ragtag group. To her, being an adventurer was a calling, not a job. Can't say that I entirely disagree, but I'm far more concerned with being able to eat than whether or not some fool is sleeping safely in his bed. Listen, bitch. The citizenry of Calcutta is safest when I've got a good brew in my belly, Rebus replied. And it ain't like they're buying. So really, to ensure their safety, they should be paying me loads. You sound like a bandit, Shortstack, she growled. Rebus, Hino and I began glaring at her once the slur left her mouth. She instantly realized her mistake, and her eyes locked onto the ground. I'm sorry. You're goddamn right you are, Hino said. Gali and I didn't call you a bitch, did we? So what the fuck are you doing using our height as an insult? It's not even a good insult, Mako said. There's a lot of advantages to being dwarf-sized. I said I'm sorry, Ifrima shouted. Fine. I'll change my insult to cousin fucker. You happy? That'll do for me, I said. Yup, Hino nodded. Much better, Mako grinned. Hey, fuck all of you, Rebus scowled. No, Rebus. We're not your cousins, Ifrima said with a wicked smile. Rebus stared at her for a moment, but couldn't come up with a comeback. Instead, he drew his sword and started angrily marching toward the dungeon. We fucking doing this or not? He asked over his shoulder. The 4 of us chuckled and started following after him. Hino, who also wields a sword and board, chased after him to share point. Marco took his place between them, not having to run because of his long legs. In his armor, our orc's damn near untouchable head-on, but since he uses a pike, he's vulnerable to attacks from the side. Hino and Rebus cover his flanks with their shields and swords, while Ephraima and I handle ranged attacks and healing when it's needed. It's a tried-and-true formation that's led us safely through many fights. But the moment we crossed the threshold of the dungeon, a knot formed in my gut. The smell of death was almost overpowering now. There's corpses everywhere, and probably a lot of them. Gods, I hate being right. We activated our lights, and I nervously checked my string and quiver. The soft twang of the string echoed in the dungeon, causing me to wince slightly. Everyone else looked at me with a raised eyebrow, and I sighed softly at my rookie mistake. We continued forward, and I noticed Ephraima fiddling with her ring. It had been given to her by her husband to mark their engagement, and it became her arcane focus after he was killed by a warg. His death is what made her want to become an adventurer. She only plays with the ring when she's thinking about him, or when she's nervous. It felt good to know that I wasn't the only one. Both the floor and the walls were tiled, apparently by magic. The lack of tool marks was a dead giveaway. Marco started poking the tiles in front of us as we went, and eventually his pike found a trap. Once the trap withdrew, he pointed out which tile was his trigger, and we stepped past it. We didn't get far before Marco stopped again. "Damn, that's gross," Marco said softly, pointing his spear at something. "What is it?" I asked. "Dead kobolds," Rebus said. "Looks like they've been here for a while." Hino held his nose and knelt to get a closer look. "They sure have. The flesh is pretty rotten. This one's neck, I could swear there's a handprint." Marco knelt down, took a look, then nodded solemnly. "Yeah, that's definitely a handprint. Those ones were cut, though. So, 2 of them? One with a blade and one strong enough to crush a kobold's skull barehanded?" "We don't know." Hino held out his hand and compared it to the neck. "Pretty sure that's a left hand. Might have been only one attacker, blade in their right hand and grabbing with their left." "There's a lot of things that use blades when they don't have to," Rebus added, as Hino and Marco stood. "Even some adventurers do that." "True," Hino shrugged. "Guess we still don't know what we're dealing with." With the mystery left unsolved, we continued on, hoping to find more clues as to what we were dealing with. It wasn't long before we did find more clues, but they were in the form of several more groups of kobold bodies. We stopped to examine each one, and our findings grew grimmer as we went. "It's like whoever did this was just playing with them," Hino said solemnly. "I don't get how you make it through this many kobolds without getting a wound or two that'll make you hesitant." "What do you mean?" Marco asked. "This one's got a spear next to it, but also has a handprint on his neck. Would you try to go hand-to-hand with someone holding a spear?" "No. The whole point of a spear is to make people keep their distance." "Hold on. This one's got a bite mark on its shoulder," Rebus said. Hino jogged over to him and examined the dead kobold. I fought the temptation to join them. "Tell me this isn't what I think it is, Hino. It only looks like that because of the rot, right?" Rebus asked. "Oh no," Hino replied. "What is it?" Marco asked. The bulking orc joined the pair of dwarves and examined the corpse. The 3 of them went uncharacteristically quiet. Ephraima and I shared an annoyed glance. "Well, don't keep us in suspense," I growled. "The fuck did you find?" The 3 of them stood. "There's no doubt about it," Marco said. "This is a vampire bite." "A vampire?" I scoffed. "Here? And since when do vampires snack on kobolds?" "Since when are you a fucking expert on vampires, Gally?" Rebus rebutted. "Since your mum told me last night, she sucked just as—" "The Night Kingdom has vamps," Marco interrupted with a sigh. "Heard that the chieftains were fighting them again this year. Could be one came through the chieftains with the drow army." "No, that doesn't make sense," Ephraima said. "Drow can't become vampires, and there's a mutual hatred there that runs deep. They wouldn't have let a vampire accompany them, And if anyone could spot a vampire, it would be a drow. I wouldn't give the drow in Loffin's army too much credit, Hino added. Heard they're dumber than the sticks they carry. Yeah, if there were any drow that would get fooled by a vamp, it would be their soldiers. Rebus scoffed. Doesn't matter how it got here, though. That's definitely a bloodsucker bite. Nothing else with teeth like that has hands, and this kobold's throat was crushed like the other ones. Nobody said anything as we contemplated how a vampire bite could have ended up on the dead kobold. After a few moments of silence, Mako shrugged, and the rest of us took that as a signal to form up. Ultimately, Rebus was right. It really doesn't matter how it happened, only that it has. I glanced at Ifrima, knowing she would be crucial in the coming fight. Vampires are legendarily difficult to put down. Pretty much have to burn the flesh right off their bones. Ideally, you dash the bones in the process. I assumed that the three in front knew how to fight vampires, then remembered an age-old saying about assumptions. So, has any of us fought vamps before? I asked. No, but I've been taught, Mako said. Pin 'em down, let the mage burn 'em. It'll be easier if you stick 'em, and me or Hebo lobs their heads off, Rebus added. Then we put the bits in a pile and have Ifrima do the whoosh. Which leaves me the task of filling the vampire full of enough arrows to slow it down enough for Mako to get his pike in deep. Good thing I brought the barb heads. Couple of gut shots or a lucky hit to the leg should do the trick. We continued down the dungeon, avoiding traps and piles of dead kobolds. Our footfalls echoed softly, almost rhythmically, but something was off with that rhythm. Mako held up his hand and we immediately stopped, readying ourselves for a fight. Here it comes, the big-ass orc said. I pulled back the string of my bow and moved to get a clear line of sight down the hall. I steadied my breathing and waited for whatever was running toward us to come into view. The sound of footsteps didn't stop and grew louder as we waited. Breathe in. Pat, 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 pat. Breathe out. Pat, 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 pat. Wait. Pat, pat. Is the vampire barefoot? Before the thought could fully construct itself, a kobold came into view. Upon seeing us ready to tear it apart, it flung itself to the ground and threw up his hands. The sounds of its whimpers replaced its footsteps. No hats, please! No fights! It said. Look! I got no pokies or slashes. I just a word bringer. The tension in my bow and jaw slackened at the same time. The tension in the rest of the party evaporated as well. I almost laughed. We'd been expecting a grueling fight with a vampire, and were instead greeted by an unarmed kobold survivor. A word bringer? Rebus asked. What word do you bring, lizard? I'm not lizard. I kobold, it said stubbornly. I eat lizard. Aren't kobolds cannibalistic? Hino asked. Dunno that word. We're wasting time. The vamp could be behind it, I said. Speak, kobold. Quickly. Yes. The Lord wants you to be word bringers and tell the, shitty people that there are vampires in here. The kobold rose to his knees and looked at us expectantly. You mean city people? I said that. Wait, did he say vampires? Mako asked. As in, more than one? More than I can count, and me count real good. The kobold nodded excitedly. Best counter, now that Thysis is dead. All the way to 7. The 5 of us froze. 1 vampire would be a hard fight. 2 would damn near kill us. 3 would guarantee a couple of us would die. More than 7 would mean that all of us would die and become vampires without even putting up a fight. Fuck that, Rebus said. Time to go. We all turned in unison and began to leave the dungeon. The patter of bare feet trailed after us. I turned to face the kobold as we continued to walk. The hell are you doing? I asked. Coming with, the kobold said, as if it were confused by the question. The 5 of us looked at each other as we walked, and each of us took a turn shrugging. Yeah, all right then, I said. Come on.